Fans of the original Hyper Agent Gridman and Superhuman Samurai Syber-Squad are definitely going to want to check out the final 2 episodes of Gridman. They're incredibly classic and feature some of the best action that we've seen from the franchise, and it has a fantastic twist ending that will leave you scratching your head and making you realize this is one of the better things that Trigger has made in a really long time. The final 2 episodes of Gridman embrace everything that is awesome about giant Japanese superheroes. It also gives us a fantastic ending to the series, which made me realize that while I did want a little bit more from Gridman, it was a pretty solid experience overall. And like I've been saying for the last couple of episode reviews, Akane Shinjo truly is the main character of the series, and the final scene of this episode will certainly create that debate. But let's just go ahead and talk about these final 2 right here. I don't really have too much to say about the Penyu Ultimate episode, the one that is sort of like leading up to the finale, as it is just that, just a big build up to the final battle of the series, which is all about Akane losing complete control of her life. She has the power of a god, but she realizes that she doesn't have any true friends. Alexis Carib takes advantage of this and transforms her into a giant monster version of herself, which goes on a massive rampage in the final episode of the series. Akane's monster form is downright horrifying. It's one of the creepiest looking kaiju that we've seen from the series, and I think the most disturbing thing about it is her actual roar. It's just her yelling no over and over again, and that with the amazing sound design of this just really makes her come across as this super tortured and very disturbing creature. What is really great, though, is that she does end up battling against, of all people, Anti in another fantastic fight with him as Grid Knight. I've said it so many times before, but Grid Knight should be the main character of the show. He's just so much cooler than Gridman, and seeing him fight in this episode again was an absolute joy and delight, watching him just jump and prowl and just pounce on Akane in her monster form. It's just so freaking great. The big, giant battles that I've really been hoping to see from the series fully came to fruition in these 2 episodes right here. Not only did we get to see the return of some of the great monsters from the previous episode, but Akane going into action was just great. But all of this was a mere appetizer, to the point where eventually she was going to be defeated until ultimately being consumed by Alexis Carib, who finally decides to reveal his true power, transforming into a giant version of himself as he prepares for his final battle with Gridman. And what is so amazing about this episode is that this entire episode seems kind of like a love letter to fans of the original show, as Gridman's appearance in this episode emulates that to a T. It literally looks like a human in a ridiculous costume fighting in this episode. Even Alexis mentions how incredibly classic it is, and the cherry on top of the kick-ass sundae has got to be the fact that they actually play the Hyper Agent Gridman theme over this entire battle sequence. And this fight, guys, definitely the best of the entire series, and so distinctly Studio Trigger for being over the top with just the way that the characters move. Honestly, and admittedly, it's kind of hard to follow with all of these explosions and these ridiculous multicolored characters just exploding on the screen, but it's such a spectacle that you find yourself in awe and you can only try and pick up your jaw from the floor. It's a great moment. It almost seems like it ends way too soon until Alexis decides that he can basically just regenerate himself out of nowhere, a la Majin Buu. But that's when Gridman reveals his superpowered ability to unleash a beam, which actually causes him to completely disintegrate and saving this digital world. Now, the thing that was surprising about this fight is that I actually thought that it ended a little early, and I didn't realize that the final minutes of the episode would be able to wrap up everything perfectly or even give us some sort of good semblance of an ending, but it actually managed to do just that. But it's an episode that is going to be up for interpretation for a lot of people, especially the final scene, and we'll get to that in a second. So the villain has effectively been defeated, and it looks like Gridman and the Neon Genesis Junior High students are going to return to their world. Alexis Carib has not been defeated, but simply sealed away, and they're going to return to the Hyperworld. Now, my big question is, what the fuck is the Hyperworld? Why do we know nothing, actually, about the backstory of anything of this series? Where did Gridman and his team come from? What is the deal with Alexis Carib? What even is he in the first place? Inquiring minds want to know. But ultimately, after watching the episode a couple of times, I realized that that's not really the entire point of the series. Not to give us some ridiculous, convoluted sci-fi explanation for why these characters exist. This was simply a series with a simple message. That people can be easily corrupted, and when they use that power, they can do really bad things, but still there manages to be goodness in people. It's really damned cheesy, but honestly it does kind of work for this show. And it also shows that even though people can do horrible things, everyone really does deserve a second chance. And that's really the deal of Akane Shinjo. She had all of this tremendous power, and she ultimately ended up abusing it, but she eventually realized what it was she did and the lives that she destroyed, and she realizes that with all of this power, she did some really terrible things. It's the Uncle Ben rule. With a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility, and Akane certainly abused all of that. It's not until the very end of the episode that we actually learn this, when we get to see that everything that was happening in Gridman, all of this 2D anime action, was actually just a construct created by a girl in the real world. And this girl just so happens to be the true form of Akane. The final scene of the episode introduces us to a live-action scene of a girl waking up, and there's been a lot of debate. Is this Rika? Is this Akane? She looks more like Rika, but there's a lot of evidence in the room to show that this is simply Akane. Of course, with the fact that Akane is also seeming to return to some sort of place, and it just sort of happens. Basically, everything that we've seen in Gridman was quite literally created by a real human. But most importantly, I loved the final scene as it sort of connects to the original Gridman show. By giving us something in live action here, they acknowledge where the series comes from, and even there's the possibility that this might not be just a simple reboot of that show, but maybe a continuation in some sense, or maybe even taking place in the same universe. It's hard to say, but it's the type of final episode that I think a lot of people are going to be talking about for a while, especially with trying to come up with their own interpretation for the ending. Essentially, this was the story of someone who had too much power, realized that they abused it, and eventually had to give it up, returning to their normal, mundane life. It was the story of Akane Shinjo, which ultimately I thought was the coolest thing about it. They made it seem like it was just going to be a stereotypical show about some young hero fighting monsters, and while those elements certainly are there and incredibly awesome, this was ultimately a character study on what happens when someone has access to something that they shouldn't have. And, I don't know, maybe that's all there is to it, but for what it was, it still managed to be pretty damn exciting and a great companion piece to the original Gridman show, as well as Superhuman Samurai Syber-Squad. We have to remember, there are 4 S's in the title, and this episode certainly did a great job of honoring that franchise, as goofy as it was, as well. So, what's the rundown on the final episode of Gridman? It was good. I don't think it fully lived up to what I was hoping that it was going to be, and in fact, I almost feel like the show could have been just a little bit longer. Then again, the final episode does plant some seeds for the fact that there could be more in the future. Especially this one final scene where we get to see that Anti, even though it seems like he's been defeated in battle, actually manages to survive, and he's actually reunited with that other mysterious kaiju girl from midway in the series, and it looks like they're going to form some form of friendship, being they have a lot in common. But we also get to reveal that apparently his eye is okay, even after being attacked by Anti, and he now has a red and a blue eye, and I don't know if there's any significance to this at all, or if this is some sort of callback to something from Gridman. All I know is I really did like the scene, as it was incredibly ominous, and I mean, the big battle with Kara was also just so freaking cool. Like I said, distinctly Trigger in the sense that it felt like kind of watching Kill La Kill or Gurren Lagann again. It certainly carried a lot of that style. For me, my favorite scene was seeing the original Gridman and the theme playing over him battling against Alexis Carib. It was just incredibly thrilling in that super cheesy anime kind of way. The kind that is almost kind of cringy, but at the same time, you just can't help but sort of want to pump your fist to it. It's just damn awesome. I was a little disappointed, too, in the fact that we didn't get too much resolution between the relationships between Yuta and Rika, as it is implied that they did have some sort of relationship, whether it be just friends or they were boyfriend and girlfriend. They never really follow up on any of that at all, and again, I think that's just establishing that while he was the host of Gridman, he wasn't the main character. It was all about Akane Shinjo, this super lonely girl who tried to create this very own world that she could control until eventually it rebelled back against her and she was forced back to face the harsh realities of life. In that sense, it's kind of deep, but then again, at the same time, it's also a show about watching superheroes fight against giant monsters, so it sort of gives you everything that you could possibly want, and it just so happens to look pretty damn good while it's doing it. Overall, I'd say my experience with Gridman has been pretty solid, and if I could give the entire series a score as well as these 2 final episodes, I think it's a good 4 out of 5. This is a really solid anime experience, and one that I feel is probably going to go down as a cult classic. Maybe not as the greatest of all time. One that's remembered for being high quality, managing to have a lot of fun and not take itself too seriously, but also still being a little deep and intellectual. It was Gridman, and it was a solid experience. If any of you guys did watch the final episode, tell me what you thought about it in the comments section, and what you hope to see from the possible future of Gridman. Tell me your thoughts about the entire series, and what other sort of like crazy takes on the tokusatsu genre you guys would like to see. Maybe you guys would like to see an anime version of Super Sentai, or the Power Rangers, or maybe even possibly Kamen Rider. Let's get a discussion going all about that in the comments section. Thank you all for watching this review. I'll see you all next time, and as always, stay down now, baby.